Hello again. Thank you very much for joining me here on Movie Ninja. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio is a spin on the classic Pinocchio story, here not taking place in the late 19th century, rather the 1930s during the Mussolini regime. Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio doesn't seek to examine Pinocchio in such a way as, is this character good enough to become a real boy? More so, does this character have suitable qualities for a good son? So, with that, the unconventional but tragically historical background and setting, as well as Mr. Del Toro's own take on fairy tales and how they can illuminate, the personal flaws of ourselves, in a very allegorical way. This is very much a return to form. So, that's the summary. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. There might be some minor spoilers, so just please bear that in mind as I move forward. With just my general thoughts about the film proper. So, in this version, like I said, the story begins where we see Geppetto, voiced by David Bradley. Very good, by the way. Excellent choice. He does a wonderful job here. And Geppetto and his son, Carlo, they spend about 10 years together. Unfortunately, Carlo is taken from him, far too early, and very similar to the Carlo Collodi, whereas Carlo Collodi had Geppetto as someone who is just, cripplingly depressed and lonely. We have that reflected here as well, and Geppetto cries out to the universe. He's like, please, why did my son, why was he taken away from me? The universe hears him and gives him a son. With this new son, Pinocchio, because he was created from an Italian pine, ergo Pinocchio. I did like that, to sort of get a better understanding as to where the name came from. That was nice. So, with Pinocchio, he is immediately brought to life, and he is extraordinarily willful. I mean, this is, a child that is just willed into existence and doesn't have any type of learning, either social or interpersonal as of yet. He's excited to be alive, and boy, what a time to be alive! Italy in the 1930s under the Mussolini regime. Yeah, so the biggest obstacle that Geppetto has is teaching him just basic moral principles, but the most important thing as of right now is obedience. Not just to have a type of father-son dynamic, but also to hopefully keep him out of trouble, especially during this tumultuous time in Italy's history. Well, unfortunately, Pinocchio gets the attention of the local party members, and they see unique advantages with having a supernatural soldier, essentially, in the ranks of the Italian army. From here, we also learn that Pinocchio has a more supernatural bent to him, and we see that the supernatural forces that brought him into existence also tether him to a very, very specific set of rules that he must obey, So with this, we have a cyclical nature of sort of life and death, or unlife, depending on how you want to sort of summarize it. But the mythology is very similar to Mr. Collodi, because in the original telling, Pinocchio did have several scrapes with death, but it was not what we would consider nowadays permadeath, simply because of his supernatural origins. But in his journeys, Pinocchio is separated from Geppetto And it is in this time of separation that he understands that, even though we are flawed in our associations with our family, we should never really take them for granted. And that, I think, is the biggest strength of this film. It is something that is far more. It is heartbreaking, but it's also heartwarming. It is whimsical while somehow talking about an incredibly dour and depressing time of early 20th century history. The rise of the fascist regimes throughout Europe. And so this is a reminder of where Mr. Del Toro, his main successes came from, with The Devil's Backbone, and later building upon that in Pan's Labyrinth. True, that was not in Italy. Those were The Devil's Backbone and Pan's Labyrinth took place within the context of the Spanish Civil War. But still, these are totalitarian regimes. They were nightmarish regimes. And so you have this sort of shining light of innocence, contrasted against this time of just overwhelming pain and loss. And so I think that's where it primarily succeeds, is that even though it's very out of place, how can you have a whimsical story about a marionette boy when all of this tragedy and horror is surrounding them? Well, sometimes innocence shines brightest in those times of great grim and obscurity and darkness. And that is something that I think the film does incredibly well. So this was to me, this is a wonderful success. A wonderful success. I would greatly recommend this film. I would say that this is not necessary because of the sheer weight of it, and I know that the late great Maurice Sendak would disagree with me, but I would not necessarily call this a family film, and that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. It's just that the topics of death and loss are so profound that it might be upsetting for viewers, say, under 12 years of age. Now, that being said, there are a lot of films, recently, actually. You have Soul, among others, that Soul, Onward, that really do talk about the separation of loss. So, leave it up to, the audience decisions when it comes to that. But it is also, I do feel like, if you're going to talk about this film, you will have to talk about the Mussolini regime and why he was such a terrible person. So that might, aside from talking about the existential aspects of life and death, well, you're also going to have to talk about one of the greatest monsters of the early 20th century. So, I mean, it's up to it's up to the audience as far as do you want to include that? Hey, why not? But it is very heavy. Now, going on to there are a lot of things that I did like about this film. There are just a few elements that I thought could have either done better or that I did not like as much. So here in this story, we do have Geppetto, we have Pinocchio, and we do have Sebastian J. Cricket, voiced by Ewan McGregor. The Cricket, who is actually supposed to act as Pinocchio's guide in this new world that he now inhabits, primarily acts as the narrator for the audience. And because the storytelling is showing us everything that is happening, then the role of narrator is kind of null and void. I didn't really see a point of Sebastian in this particular production, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's definitely not a deal breaker, but it definitely reduced the Cricket, the conscience. to the point where I had to ask myself, do we even need this character? So anytime you have kind of a superfluous character, I would say that that's kind of a loss to the story. The character isn't bad, and I certainly don't object to them being in here, but it's just, what is the purpose of it all if I can see everything that is happening? That being said, I would say that the greatest weight that that particular character has is at the very beginning and the very end, to sort of explain exactly what's been going on. The other element that I would say was sorely lacking for this, and this, to me especially, this is a big one, is the soundtrack. There are several songs in this. Now, they're on the shorter end, but most of which I said to myself, why is this here? What are we doing? There are, you know, like you can tell that whoever was in charge of the music is trying really hard to really sort of like put it out there, like, hey, we're not Disney, but we have songs. And I I just felt a lot of the musical arrangement was rather, it missed a lot of impact for me. Now, there are two songs that I will say did stand out. Ciao Papa. Ciao Papa is a story where, is a song that really does capture the pain of when we are separated from those that we love. That represents a kind of loss, because the time that we spend away from them, we can never recover. So even if we join them again, that time that we were apart, it represents a kind of loss, or a kind of cavity in the life of those that you consider, most dear to you. And Ciao Papa it did make me emotional. It was very well done, and it was impactful, but it not enough of the soundtrack or the musical arrangement really had that type of power. The other song, I don't even know what the song is like that was connected to it, was Pinocchio, and they assisted by a monkey who acts as kind of like the marionette for the circus that Pinocchio travels with for a time. They make a production where they really just tell Mussolini, what he can do with himself. And that was, I clapped. It was like, okay, this, I'm all for this. But this was a way of Pinocchio not just severing his contract with the circus manager who had kind of given him, sort of like false pretenses for their partnership, but also really just kind of like, this is one of the closest to like springtime for Hitler, sort of like as a sort of like mock-up of like, oh, okay, this leader was a monster, and it's like, we're tired of him, and this is just a number of animators and comedy writers just living their dreams. Like, you know what? If we had the opportunity to tell Il Dulce what he could do with himself, it would be in this number. So I will say like that. There are two songs. One of them is not technically a song. It's actually a scene set piece. But there are two bits of like music in here that, they will get your attention, and you will recall the lyrics fairly easily. Now, that being said, those we have really just the one character that was kind of just ill-used in the production. Like I said, nothing particularly like bad with the inclusion of Sebastian or anything like that. And the really lackluster soundtrack keeps this production from being a solid, perfect score. I would still put it at a 9 out of 10. This, like I said, this is Guillermo Del Toro returning to form in terms of utilizing fairy tales and the worst of human experience from history, and bringing these two things together to showcase a a really revitalized version of the Pinocchio narrative, but also a very creative and interesting story in and of itself. So, that is my review of Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. It is a solid 9 out of 10. What about you all? Have you seen the film? Do you plan on seeing it? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much, as always, for joining me here on Movie Ninja, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.